Hey everybody, welcome back. You made it to the last unit, so you know what to do. Get that study guide ready, and let's go. Unit 5 is political participation, and it's about all the various ways that citizens are connected to governmental institutions. As usual, there are a few big picture questions lurking in the background. Why do some people choose to participate in government and others don't? Why do some people join a political party and others don't? How does who you are affect whether you participate or not? Okay, let's talk about the expansion of opportunities for political participation through several constitutional amendments. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the U.S., most notably including people who were formerly enslaved. The 15th Amendment stated that a person couldn't be denied the right to vote based on race. The 17th Amendment called for the direct election of senators, and the 19th Amendment said that sex couldn't be a barrier to voting. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes, and the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. Then there's the question of how people choose how to vote. Let's consider 4 political models that explain voting behavior. Rational choice voting is voting based on what's perceived to be in the voter's individual personal interest, like an old person voting for a candidate who promises to expand Medicare. Straight ticket voting describes a person who only votes for candidates from a single party, like either all Republicans or all Democrats. Easy peasy. Retrospective voting is voting based on the recent past. It's more about how you feel about the incumbent than the challenger. For example, if you don't like the current president, then voting for the challenger just because she's somebody different. Lastly, prospective voting is voting based on which candidate you think will handle future issues better, like who you'd rather nominate federal judges or that kind of thing. Other factors that influence voter choice include party identification and ideology. In fact, party identification is the best predictor of how a person will vote. Candidate characteristics like perceived honesty or competency also matter. So do contemporary political issues and religious affiliation, gender, as well as race and ethnicity. They all influence voter choice. Political efficacy refers to a person's belief that she can affect political outcomes. A person with a high level of political efficacy is more likely to vote and participate politically than somebody who believes that their vote doesn't matter. Speaking in very broad strokes, people are more likely to vote the older they get, the more education they have, and the higher their income is. There are structural issues that also affect voter turnout. Remember that each state makes its own election policies, including voter registration laws. State legislatures can make it tougher or easier to register. For example, some states require a person to register in person, while others let you do it online, and still others register people automatically. Additionally, there are differences in early voting, absentee, and mail-in voting opportunities, the hours that polls are open, and variations in funding allotted for polling places and workers. Additionally, some states have implemented strict voter photo ID laws, which potentially could decrease turnout. The type of election matters too. Presidential elections have consistently higher turnout than midterm elections, for example. Alright, so the rest of the unit explores 4 major linkage institutions. Linkage institutions connect people to the government and include political parties, interest groups, elections, and the news media. The primary goal of a political party is to gain power and win elections. After all, they can only influence public policy if they win. Insider tip? The exam focuses a lot on the functions of political parties. So first, parties mobilize and educate voters, providing people information that supports their candidates and helps to get their supporters to the polls so they actually vote. They also establish a platform, which is basically a statement of the party's policies and goals for the next 4 years. They also recruit candidates to run for office, help manage campaigns, raise money for candidates, and facilitate media strategy to try to benefit the party and their candidates. Now let's talk about how parties have changed. First, there's the rise of candidate-centered politics, where some voters focus more on the individual candidate than their party affiliation. This weakens the party's control over candidates. Critical elections are elections in which a major political issue leads to new party coalitions and sometimes to a regional realignment. This happened during the Civil Rights era, when the South, which had been strongly Democratic, shifted to the Republican Party. Another change that's weakened parties is the rise of the primary system, allowing citizens to help choose their party's candidates, reducing the influence of party leaders. Similarly, changes in campaign finance laws have made it easier for candidates to raise their own money, so now they're less reliant on the party for fundraising. And in this era of big tech, parties attempt to use these resources to target political messaging and to mobilize voters. Don't forget there are other parties besides Democrats and Republicans that we kind of disparagingly refer to as third parties. The Constitution doesn't overtly establish a two-party system, but there are a number of structural barriers, meaning the way that elections are conducted in this country that act as barriers for third-party success. First, the US has winner-take-all voting districts. There's an election in all 435 districts every even-numbered year, and the winner of each election goes to the House as a representative. The third party isn't likely to come in first place, so it's unlikely that they can win much, if any, representation in Congress. An informal barrier third parties face is that when they successfully build support for a policy, one of the two major parties will often just take that issue and include it in their own platform, and with that, take away potential support for the third party. Additionally, many people think that voting for the third parties is a waste of their vote. Another way people can attempt to influence public policy is via interest groups. The purpose of an interest group is to influence public policy, usually for a specific purpose, but sometimes for a more general, broad purpose. One function of interest groups is to educate voters and office holders. Now, this isn't unbiased, neutral information that they're providing people, but interest groups hire lobbyists who provide information to policymakers who are ideologically aligned with the group, convincing them how to vote on key legislation. Additionally, lobbyists sometimes meet with members of congressional committees and assist with drafting legislation, even proposing changes to the bill and ways to word the bill that they would support. Additionally, they can mobilize their membership, putting pressure on policymakers through social media, phone calls, and town hall meetings, or helping voters get to the polling places to vote for or against certain candidates. They also raise money to support campaigns through PACs and to make political advertisements. Interest groups also influence bureaucratic agencies as part of iron triangles and issue networks. Remember that bureaucratic agencies make rules and regulations, so interest groups sometimes focus their efforts on agency decision makers. Interest groups receive legislation and regulations that they favor while giving electoral support to congressmen who in turn provide funding and political support to the agency. Interest groups also attempt to influence the Supreme Court through amicus curiae briefs, which literally means a friend of the court. These are submitted by groups who aren't directly involved in the case, but they want to influence the Supreme Court's decision by making their argument about how they think the court should rule. One issue with interest groups is the inequality of political and economic resources. Some interest groups have larger memberships or are very well funded, and this gives them a huge advantage over smaller, less well-funded groups. And this contributes directly to the second issue, unequal access to decision makers. Those well-funded groups or those with large memberships typically have more access to policymakers. Not all interest groups are in the room where it happens. Oh, and lastly, there's the free rider problem that some interest groups encounter when people who aren't members benefit from the group's efforts, so people then lack the incentive to join the group and financially support it, which can hinder the group in accomplishing its goals in the first place. Now, there are other ways that citizens come together to influence policy and demand change. One way is through social movements, which are broad-based efforts to achieve major policy change. These are often grassroots movements where a large number of people rise up to demand change to a specific problem that they perceive. These can sometimes succeed in achieving policy success, but at the same time may lack leadership, resources, infrastructure, and clear policy objectives, which can hinder their success. Okay, let's shift gears to elections, and let's start with presidential elections. The first thing to know is that in recent decades, the incumbent president often wins re-election. There are several reasons for this incumbency advantage, including already having campaign experience, having a network of campaign donors, and already being seen as presidential. Now the main course. There are two types of elections, general and primary. A general election is where the winner takes office, like Biden versus Trump in 2020. But before that, there are primaries that allow members of a political party to vote for who will be their party's candidate in the general election. Over the course of a few months, these elections are held in every state, and each state does them a little differently. I'm pretty sure just to make AP Gov test questions. Some states have a caucus instead of a primary, which is a meeting of party members where people get together and talk about the candidates and then vote in front of each other. But the purpose of caucuses is the same as primaries. Most states have primary elections, though there's variation here too. States with open primaries allow any registered voter to participate in either party's primary. You can't vote in both, but you get to choose either one. But closed primaries only allow people who are registered to that party to participate. They're closed to non-party members. Oversimplification alert. After the primaries and all the states end, whichever candidate has the most delegates will be officially nominated as the party's presidential candidate at the national convention. Again, it's complicated, but basically when a candidate wins a primary, they win a certain number of delegates, who are the people who go to the national convention to officially elect the party's candidate. And then it's on to the general election, where the president is officially chosen by the Electoral College. To win the presidency, a candidate must receive a majority of the electoral votes, which is 270. If no candidate gets 270, the House chooses the president. The way you win electoral votes is by winning the most votes in a state. 48 states have a winner-take-all system, meaning that whoever wins the most votes in that state even if it's by a single vote, wins all of that state's electoral votes. Because of this, candidates focus most of their time, money, campaign resources focusing on just a handful of competitive states, known as swing or battleground states, totally ignoring most states that are solidly Democratic or Republican. The number of electoral votes each state has is their number of representatives plus senators, so each state has at least 3 electoral votes. This means that small states are mathematically overrepresented in the Electoral College. Insider tip: think about arguments for and against the Electoral College, since this makes such a good argument essay prompt. Arguments in favor of the Electoral College include that states retain an important role in the decision. It ensures geographic balance because otherwise candidates would just focus on densely populated urban areas, and it guards against mob rule by uninformed voters. Those who oppose the Electoral College say that it gives too much power to voters in swing states, that it's anti-democratic because it ignores the popular vote, and that the winner-take-all feature discourages third-party candidates from running. By the way, an important difference between primaries and general elections is who shows up to vote. Turnout is higher in general elections, so voters in primaries are usually more partisan and more ideological than average voters. Similarly, turnout is also lower in congressional and midterm elections, and the voters there are also more partisan. Like presidential elections, congressional elections also have open and closed primaries and caucuses to choose the party's candidates. Like presidents, incumbent congressmen typically win re-election, and this incumbency advantage is even stronger. Reasons for this include that they provide casework or constituent service, they receive the vast majority of PAC contributions, they have better name recognition, and usually have more media visibility than their challenger. Modern campaigns are characterized by several changes in recent decades: dependence on professional consultants, rising campaign costs, and intensive fundraising efforts. Long election cycles, upward of 2 years long, are common at this point, and campaigns have become more and more reliant on social media as a means of campaign communication and fundraising. All right, next up is campaign finance. Let's start with some basics. First, there are 2 types of campaign contributions. Hard money contributions are made directly to a candidate and are restricted and regulated. Soft money is money contributed to political parties for party-building purposes, and this money is both unlimited and unrestricted. In 2002, Congress passed a law known as the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, aka BICRA. The legislation banned soft money, established the Stand By Your Ad provision, banned corporations from contributing directly to campaigns, and placed limits on the timing of independent political ads, disallowing them in the 30 or 60 days leading up to an election. But then Citizens United versus FEC reshaped campaign finance law once again. The FEC prevented a nonprofit from airing commercials for the group's anti-Hillary Clinton movie, ruling that the commercials were corporate political ads in violation of BICRA. The court struck down several key portions of BICRA, including the ban on soft money and the timing restrictions on political ads, holding that corporate funding of independent political spending cannot be limited. And this is because corporations have the same right to free and political speech as individuals. This ruling has been controversial, but to the majority, this is simply a free speech case blocking governmental censorship. To the dissenting justices, it's about protecting the integrity of elections by limiting corporate influence on election outcomes. Insider tip: the debate over free speech and political contributions is one of the most important concepts in all of Unit 5. The court's ruling in Citizens United led to the creation of super PACs. But first, let's define regular PACs. A political action committee raises money to support a candidate. Super PACs are really called independent expenditure only committees, and can raise and spend an unlimited amount of money independent of the candidate. Independent expenditures are money spent on politics to help a campaign, but the money isn't given directly to the campaign. Instead, viewed as a group of like-minded people pooling their money so they can make political ads or do other things to help campaigns. Both PACs and super PACs can raise and spend an unlimited amount of independent money. However, corporations and unions may not contribute to a regular PAC, and regular PACs may contribute a small amount of money directly to a candidate. With super PACs, corporations and unions may contribute, but super PACs cannot contribute any money directly to a candidate. We're almost there. The last 2 sections are about the news media. Now, obviously, the way people get their news has changed over time, from newspapers to radio to TV and internet and now to social media. The media's role as gatekeeper means that news organizations choose what to report on and for how long to focus on it. This is hugely important because if they ignore something, the public may not know about it, while if they report on something a lot, it will appear more important to people. In fact, this is part of the media's role in agenda setting. Once an issue becomes important to people, they demand that policymakers and government address their concerns, and the issue becomes part of the governmental agenda. There is also horse-race journalism, choosing to report on polls and popularity of candidates instead of more substantive reporting, such as the qualifications and platforms of candidates. And in the watchdog role, the media informs the public about government corruption or incompetence through investigative journalism. Without a doubt, we have seen a dramatic increase in media choices, more news sources than ever before, but we're not necessarily better informed. Part of the problem is uncertainty over the credibility of these news sources. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about fake news in the last few years, as well as debates over media bias, so sometimes it can be tough to know the reliability of news sources. Additionally, the main goal of consumer-driven media outlets is to make money, and so they want to increase the number of clicks and views, often by focusing on dramatic and outrageous stories rather than more substantive reporting. Ideologically oriented programming is basically news that's targeted to specific people, be they conservative, liberal, alt-right, progressive, what have you. And this also has the effect of reinforcing existing beliefs and contributing to polarization. And that is it for Unit 5. Great job. Make sure to finish the study guide and multiple choice practice. As you get closer to the AP exam, take advantage of the 3 multiple choice practice tests and check out the other resources here to help you do your best on the AP exam. Until next time, this has been a La Money production.